If Missouri's going to make the college football playoff, it's going to come down to these 7 games in 2025.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, after the Tigers secured a recruitment from Isaac Jensen, I think I've perhaps detected a change in recruiting philosophy here, at least a slight one here from Eli Drinkwitz and company. And before I start the program, I remind you today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And you know what? It feels appropriate that FanDuel is the title sponsor here today because I'm going to do a little something called Guess the... Well, wait, I shouldn't call it that, should I? Let's call it Predict the Point Spreads. Yes, that'll do. And really, this is an exercise I like to do quite a bit in my own life, and that's to try to actually predict what the point spread for a game is going to be before I see it, because anytime there's a discrepancy there, well, that tells me some information. It tells me either that I know something that Vegas doesn't, or often FanDuel/Vegas knows something that I don't. That's actually much more often the case, especially when it doesn't have something to do with the Missouri Tigers. When we're talking about other teams, definitely the wisdom of the crowds comes into play here for sure. But my specific knowledge of the Tigers, that's where I feel like I can make something happen, and I feel like I've proven I can do so over the years. But you know what? I digress, because the point of this exercise here today is to see where exactly Missouri sits in the 2025 football season compared to its opponents, and what are the most important games of this season. So without further ado here, let's just go through it. Why don't you play this game along with me? Of course, Missouri opens the season up late August, Thursday night, Central Arkansas, an FCS opponent. So I'll just tell you right now, there's probably not going to be a point spread on this particular game. Maybe, certainly until game week, more than likely over at FanDuel, maybe even the day of. FBS versus the lower FCS, usually not happening, but Central Arkansas. What's your guess? Well, mine was minus 42. That's what I took. I think the Tigers will be a 7-touchdown favorite without the extra points, or 6 if you're including the extra points. So whatever way you're looking at it, there's virtually zero chance that Missouri is going to lose that ball game. So not really a whole lot of point in saying much about that. Next, of course, being a return after 14 years, and even longer, actually 19 years, I believe, since Kansas has actually come to Columbia. Yes, it is the dreadful Kansas Jayhawks. Just how much do you think Missouri is going to be favored in this game? I think that's a safe assumption that the Tigers are going to be favored. The question is how much, and my thinking is 7 points. I think it's going to be a full touchdown and an extra point. I just think anything less than that, based on what Missouri has done the past few seasons, you're probably going to get too much money on the Tigers at that point. And anything more than that, well, maybe is a little bit too disrespectful to the Jayhawks, quite honestly, who didn't have a great season last year based on their expectations, and yet based on some injuries and some, what statisticians would say is bad one-score luck, whether that's actually luck or not is a whole other discussion. The point is that's what it's sort of discussed at. That's what it's sort of commonly referred to as. But the point here is there's no doubt the Tigers are going to be favored in this ball game. I just think it'll be interesting to see how much. It'll certainly be more than a field goal, but I'm guessing a touchdown, more than a touchdown. I'd just be surprised by that. I don't think it's going to be Missouri by 10 or anything like that. So I guess I'm sort of splitting the difference and saying Missouri will be favored against the Jayhawks by 7. Next game, Louisiana, the Ragin' Cajuns Is this going to be another multi-touchdown type affair? Well, I'm thinking so, but you know what? Louisiana might be a little bit better than you expect. So I'm going 15.5 here. This is a game that I think the Tigers could lose, but I think 95% of the time they win it fairly easily. So give me Missouri minus 15.5 in that game. Next. So South Carolina, or USC Little E, as I like to call them, Little East. South Carolina, USC East. You know what? A close game last year, but other than that, Eli Drinkwitz has had Shane Beamer's number. I'm thinking there's a decent chance that could return this year, although South Carolina definitely with the advantage at quarterback. At least that's how the nation is going to view it coming into the season. Again, all these lines I'm guessing are as of right now. Who the heck knows what this is going to look like by the time week 4 actually comes along here. But I'm thinking more or less a coin flip once again. The Tigers maybe get a little bit of credit for being at home. So, Missouri, a 1.5 point favorite against the Gamecocks. Again, I hope you're playing along here, and I'd love to hear why you think I'm right, wrong, or really, really, really wrong. I'd love to hear all of that for sure. And next, we have UMass. Yes, the Minutemen, 5 straight home games, and we're not even done, by the way. But you might be thinking, gosh, if the Ragin' Cajuns of Louisiana were only 15.5 point favorites, well, maybe this is a closer one than I'm expecting with UMass. You'd be wrong, because there really is, projection-wise, and based on what we saw in Amherst last season by the Tigers, Missouri's going to be a huge favorite against the Minutemen. I'm going minus 35, so a 5-touchdown spread there for Missouri against UMass. Next. So, now it starts to get really interesting. Now, Missouri, finally, its final home game here of this stretch. 6 games to start the season. A real different opponent here, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Safe to say Alabama, certainly at this moment, is going to be favored in that ball game. As of now, no actual lines from FanDuel Sportsbook, so this is all, again, just an exercise. But what's your guess? Because mine is Alabama is going to be favored by 13.5. That's what I'm guessing. I think anything more than 2 touchdowns is probably too much, at least at this point. And maybe even I'm a little bit high there, honestly. But the projection systems that I've seen still have the Crimson Tide as a projected top 5 team after coming off of what was, by their standards, a disappointing 2024. But finally, the Tigers will leave the state of Missouri to play at Jordan-Hare Stadium, as I like to pronounce it. I think, again, we're talking mostly a coin flip here, since it's on the road, since the projection systems, like the 2 Tiger squads, more or less the same, I would say. I'm going to give Auburn the slight edge here. I think Missouri will be getting 2.5 points, a slight underdog. Our Tigers will be as of today in Auburn. And hey, another road game here, Nashville this time at Vanderbilt. Of course, Missouri was very fortunate to win in a lot of ways last season against the Commodores, but a big-time move and catch and throw by Luther Burden III helps Missouri win that game. I think the Tigers will be significant favorites, more than a field goal, but less than a touchdown. We'll say the old in-between zone, 5.5, the old speed limit there. Give me 5.5. Missouri being a slight favorite there. But this is definitely one of those games that it's all gonna come down to if Missouri is going to be in the college football playoff. So, you know what? Since I am coming up a little bit here on time, let me tease the final 4 games here. You got 2 at home, 2 on the road. Missouri going to be a significant favorite in one of them, but the rest, more of a nail-biting type variety. Where do I think it's all going to come down? I'll tell you in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about FanDuel because, of course, the NBA playoffs, and in fact, the finals are in full swing tonight. Yes, the Thunder and the Pacers. Pacers facing off once again. Sorry, I'm sort of hemming and hawing here as I'm trying to bring up the point spread here. It was 5 at last check. Oklahoma City was favored in Indianapolis tonight. Let me make sure I have that number correct. Yes, 5 is the number. Oklahoma City favored. Does that surprise you? Do you still like the underdog Pacers? Well, FanDuel's the place to be, whether it's before the tip-off or during the game. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's finish out the final four here of Predict the Point Spreads. I got to get that trademark right now. There's no way that's not an original idea. But Texas A&M, who steamrolled Missouri, to be brutally honest with you, last year in College Station. And yet, what's your guess? Because I have the Tigers as favorites in this ball game. Small favorites, though it might be. Missouri minus 2.5 against Texas A&M. That's my guess. What is yours? And then the Missouri finishes out the home part of the schedule. Mississippi State minus 13.5. That's what I've got. So basically, if you're thinking, wow, they're about as bad as Louisiana, well, the projection systems say so. Missouri dominated this game in Starkville last season. Yeah, I think the Tigers are probably going to put it on the Bulldogs of Mississippi State once again. So that's how I'm seeing it. I think 2 touchdowns would probably be too much, but anything less than 13.5, I'm probably going to be putting some money on the Tigers' side. So a couple of final road games here. Of course, Missouri taking on Oklahoma for the first time, like Kansas, in 14 years as well. Of course, this one in Norman, and that's a huge factor here. A lot of people are expecting a comeback-type season from Oklahoma this year after in 2024 they had just a ton of injuries, especially on the offensive line and at receiver. But, of course, the Sooners showed they could play with some of the big boys in college football, including Oklahoma. So where I am with all of this, after factoring in, well, some positive regression for Oklahoma, presumably this season, you got to think their injury luck will be better. You got to think the offensive line will be more or less fixed. And bringing in John Mateer, bringing a new offensive coordinator with him, well, I hate to say it, I got the Sooners as pretty significant favorites here. 6.5 in Norman. Again, that's how I think it would play out if the books open today. By the time we get to late November, who the heck knows what this point spread could be, but that's how I'm feeling about it right now. Missouri, just under a full touchdown as an underdog, are the Tigers. And finally, of course, the usual Arkansas battle line, a.k.a. the Ozark Bowl, as I like to call it, at Arkansas. I'm thinking the Tigers are going to be favored in this game. 7 seems like too much, so again, I'm kind of going the little in-between, just like I did with Vanderbilt, by the way. I think those are similarly talented teams, if not different how they're going to get there at the end of the day. So give me 5.5. Once again, I think Missouri will be a significant but not huge favorite against the Razorbacks this season. You may think that's silly based on how Missouri has, well, handled Arkansas. Remember, it was a close game last year. Definitely could have gone either way, a little nip and tuck. And also, hey, the projection systems like the Hogs, better than they usually perform the last few seasons, at least in terms of their record. So something to keep in mind there. So obviously I just threw a lot of numbers here at you over the last dozen minutes or so. So maybe the best way to look at this visually is to not look at it linearly from game 1 through game 12. Well, maybe let's just go, how about in descending order? The biggest spreads for Missouri in terms of their being favored to, well, they're the biggest underdogs. I'll bring that up for you, those of you on YouTube right now. Again, these are just my guesses here. As imprecise as they may be, I think it provides a pretty good guidepost for the season. So you look at it, Missouri's got basically two obvious wins in the bag, Central Arkansas and UMass, 35 and 42. Those are the spreads I'm guessing. Now, Louisiana and Mississippi State, those are games that in theory you could lose, but boy, if you're going to have any type of a successful season, you got to win those as well. So Missouri's 4-0 right there if you look at it that way. Now I'm grouping 5 games in where Missouri is a favorite, but only by a touchdown or less. That's Kansas, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, and South Carolina. Again, quibble with those point spreads all you want. I think most of us would agree that that's a pretty good grouping of the likelihood of victory there. And then a couple more home games I'll put below that I think Missouri will be an underdog, but less than a touchdown type of underdog. That's, of course, at Jordan-Hare Stadium with the Auburn Tigers and Oklahoma as well. Then finally, of course, the one game that stands out from the rest, Alabama, where I think the Tigers will be about a 2-touchdown underdog as we sit here this summer. So what does that tell you? That tells you that those 7 games, again, Kansas, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, South Carolina, Auburn, and Oklahoma, those are going to be the games that probably determine the season. I'm not saying Missouri can't beat Alabama, and I'm not saying they can't lose to Mississippi State. But what I am telling you is the most likely thing to happen is that Missouri goes 4-1 in those the big favorite games. They're probably going to go 4-1. The big spread games, I should say, 4-1 is a likelihood. So what does that mean? Well, as I said last season, hey, 10-2 is going to get you in the playoffs. I'm sticking with that again. So in those games, we're talking 4 road games, 3 home games for Missouri. Hold on to your butts. If the Tigers are able to squeak some victories out there, if it's more like, 2023 in terms of those 1-score victories, if the Tigers can somehow go 6-1 in those crucial games there in the middle part of this list here, well, you're looking at a college football playoff team. You really are. And coming up, Missouri's latest recruit at the tight end position has me thinking that there's a bit of a shift in philosophy here, so let's talk about it after these quick words. By the way, one thing I had somehow missed from this past spring period is that Keegan Trost was named the Missouri starting right tackle by Eli Drinkwitz. Somehow that little fact had gotten past me. It didn't seem like there was a big announcement or anything, but that is something that Eli Drinkwitz said at some point or another. And as the optimistic Missouri fan that I am, no guarantees here, but I'm choosing to take that as a positive sign considering, well, Drinkwitz kind of goes out of his way to not name a starting quarterback through spring among many other positions. But anyway, back to the topic at hand here. Isaac Jensen, your latest high school addition to Missouri's recruiting haul here, an Omaha, Nebraska-based tight end, 6'6", 230 pounds. The hometown Huskers, as well as Iowa State and Texas A&M, were among his suitors. And it just seems to me, again, that body type, 6'6", 230, seems to be more of an emphasis on finding true upside as far as receivers go at this position. Whereas in the past, I think you've seen maybe more of a run blocking emphasis from tight ends for certain in the Missouri offense. I was hoping that would change a little bit more dramatically last season with Brett Norfleet, who was certainly bothered by an early shoulder injury last season. We'll see if maybe that breakthrough comes in 2025. But I will say this, again, 6'6", 230 pounds, that particular body type. One of the reasons it's tough to find those types of guys just in general, not for Missouri, but usually those guys, if you're that size, that body type, and you're good enough to be an SEC type of tight end recruit, well, it means you're probably pretty good at basketball too. So especially when those guys get into 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", they tend to be hopping into that sport more often than not. And let's be honest, to a lot of people, well, basketball's a little bit more fun to play when you have that option. Lord knows I love both the sports, but I could certainly understand why a lot of people choose to go on the hardwood. No question about that. And finally, I do want to add some more details to what has been called the House settlement. Basically, NCAA amateurism, it's officially dead at this point. Well, in terms of roster structure, quite a bit has changed as well. In fact, pretty dramatically in some cases, especially in football where the roster limit was 85 scholarship players. Well, now there's just a roster limit, period. It's not based on scholarships, and the number's now 105. Again, from 85 to 105. Now, the thing is, even if you have 105 players on your roster, obviously not all of those players are created equally. It may very well be true that, and in fact, I'd almost guarantee that this is the case, that, well, most of those guys are going to be not paid very much. In fact, they might just be on scholarship, and that's that, because realistically, 105 guys are obviously not going to be seeing the field every Saturday. So maybe there really is a type of, almost a two-tiered type of system where it almost looks like the NFL, where you've got, half the guys who are actually playing. Well, they're going to be getting a chunk of that change that is part of the House settlement ruling here, the $20 million, and it's presuming to keep going up every year after that. Well, not everybody on the roster is going to be getting a piece of that. This is not going to be a perfectly evenly spliced up pie. And obviously the quarterbacks, the star receivers, the most important guys perceived on your roster, and just the most difficult guys to get in the transfer portal and in high school recruiting too, well, those guys are going to get the lion's share of the money, just like they do in free agency in the NFL. So once again, I think yet another way where college football is becoming more like the NFL. And also, well, this applies to men's basketball as well, where there was a 13 scholarship limit. Well, now there's just a 15 player limit on your roster, period. And baseball, for example, well, there were very small scholarship limits, relatively speaking, in that sport. 12 was the limit, or 11.7, the 0.7 being a partial scholarship calculation there. Well, now you're essentially going to have 34 roster spots in baseball. If you want to spend it on 11.7 or 12 or 0 or 34, that's going to be your right. Every school is going to divvy it up how they want to. The obvious assumption is that the massive lion's share of them are going to be spending the lion's share of their money on football. I certainly know Missouri's going to do that, and probably whatever is left over, again, the lion's share of that is going to be on men's basketball. Can't really argue with that calculation at this point. Can you? The two sports that actually bring in a decent amount of money, football being the biggest cash cow of all, and by far not even close, basically paying for everything else. I think men's basketball may make a little profit or mostly break even. I'm not sure. But compared to football, well, there really is no comparison. But all I know is the beat marches on with college football in the Missouri beat, and I'm going to be here to discuss all of it for you because I just love it. What can I tell you? And thanks for being here with me on Locked On Mizzou. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And for your second listen, check out the portal. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan you can with the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked On Mizzou.